Hey, this week's conversation is centred around a book called The Gene Keys. And the reason why I want to get round to that is because my journey from personal development, which was just short of 4 decades ago when I started that, moved rapidly in these last 2 years into looking in myself, i.e. spiritual development. But it took me just short of 4 decades to get to that point in life. And I'm learning a lot of amazing stuff, and my transformation has been quite immense, to the point where I do share and work with people. And if you go to my website at stephenbones.com, you can have a free conversation with me about that, no charge. And if you want to work with me more, you can do, or you just want to chat with me more, that's fine. Very relaxed and no judgment at all, whatever you want to do. It's a very private space, but you just need to put your name and email address in. But let's talk about the 64 gene keys, and it's really quite fascinating. Now, you've got to understand, I'm not an academic. I'm a normal, ordinary guy that's started off in sales and then began in what I call the traditional world of business, bricks and mortar business, and then now I work and consult with other businesses, and I work online as well. So my life has changed dramatically to what it was, which is quite exciting in itself. But the interesting thing is that's really what the Gene Keys is about. And the Gene Keys are centred on some teachings and writings called the I Ching. And they were wrote somewhere around about 400 BC. And this guy, Richard Rudd in the UK, started to write after studying for many years, started to write and put together this book called the 64 Gene Keys, because what he worked out is the code of those keys. And essentially, in a nutshell, what it is at that time in the world, these writings were talking about connecting with our higher self and how to connect with our higher self. And the sages of those times would teach this. And I might add, in different parts of the world, the same similar or same writings were coming out and taught by different sages. Well, of course, there was no communication in those days, so big question mark. If you think this is all woo-woo, how was that possible then? So you then take that forward. Let's really fast forward through the Western world where we are today. We don't talk to our higher consciousness. There is a movement now. More people are opening up to the fact that we're here for a purpose. There's something more to life. What is it? I mean, people will engage and talk with me more about this stuff. But in the scientific part of the Gene Keys is really quite interesting. Bearing in mind, this came from teachings 400 BC. Okay, so what we're talking about now is scientists are now changing their view due to these types of codes that they're finding within the human body that these teachings wrote about all those years ago. And essentially our body has got 60 trillion cells within it, and in the centre of it is our DNA. And a lot of scientists for many years, and a lot still do, believe that when we're born, that DNA is set in stone, and that's going to create the pattern of your life. Whereas the I Ching and the 64 Gene Keys that's based on it teaches that our DNA actually listens to the frequency and the energy within our body, so it's communicating all the time. So you imagine all 60 trillion cells are all highly tuned and listening to our cells all the time. And what I mean by that is our higher or lower frequency. And the lower frequency is when we feel down, depressed, sad, and those sort of feelings. And when we feel those feelings, then that lower frequency connects with our DNA, and this is in simple form. And what happens then is we vibrate at that level, and the DNA responds and gives us more, and can even take us into depression, anxiety, panic, etc. from those lower frequency feelings. And then there's the higher frequency, and the higher frequency is where we which is what we call the gift. So the shadow is the lower frequency and the gift is the higher frequency, And each of these 64 codes have got different shadows, and which I'll come to in a minute, and different gifts. And that's the most fascinating thing. So what then happens is when we vibrate at communicate at a higher frequency, all that DNA receives that communication, and that feel-good factor can stay with us for a period of time while we're in that space. So essentially, that's how it works. Now, each one of these keys, each 64 keys, is now written that when we're born, at the exact time and minute, we have a key, and there are 11 of them. And those keys revolve around our purpose in life, our Venus, our relationship, and our work life. And essentially, without confusing that, there are 11 keys. And interestingly enough, when you get into those keys, it's amazing how they are given to you at birth, so they're impregnated on you in birth, and they then control your life. So there's a shadow, a gift, and what's called a siddhi, which is, if you like, the higher frequency, but it is an old Sanskrit word for divine intervention, I think is the correct translation of that. So, but what we're concerned about at the minute is the shadow and the gift. So the shadow and the gift is the lower and the higher frequency that communicates with our DNA. And interestingly enough, it's a bit like a horoscope, for simple terms, that our patterns of life with each key has these shadows and gifts, and you either work in the shadow or you work with the gift. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what healing, in the type of healing and work I do with energy, is all about. It's shining a light on that shadow and helping others to understand what that shadow is all about. So if you're feeling depressed, anxiety, struggling with life in general, can't seem to get going, keep it in a brick wall, and that doesn't matter how successful you are in your career, we still all go through these patterns of behaviour. And interestingly enough, it tends to be because we're living in the shadow, because we've cut off this communication of the higher frequency with our DNA. And it's really fascinating stuff. That is the science of it, and scientists are playing about this now. If you go to Princetown University website and Google consciousness, they're doing experiments now with the higher consciousness, which is what this is all about, which is essentially the energy that communicates with the DNA. So, hey, if you want to know more, then by all means go to my website, put your name and email address in the box, and we'll connect, and we can have a couple of hour conversation on it if you want, or an hour's conversation, completely free of charge. I just like connecting with people and chatting with people. And if you are struggling, again, I will talk to you and see if there's a way forward, or advise you to which way to go, and go down a healing path. And how do I know how to do all that? Because I've been down a healing path, and it took me a lot of decades to get to that healing moment in life. But you know, it's quite amazing when you start this transformation. Yeah, just connect. Thanks for listening to me, and we will speak soon. Bye for now.